Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. I'm Dennis Ward. Members from the Saddle Lake Cree Nation in Alberta released a report this week on unmarked graves. It states hundreds of children who attended the Blue Quills Indian Residential School died from contracting tuberculosis from tainted cow's milk. APTN's Chris Stewart has the story and a warning some details may be disturbing to some viewers.
The Blue Quills Indian Residential School existed from 1891 until 1970, having changed locations 3 times. Between 1898 and 1931, it operated on the Saddle Lake Cree Nation. Saddle Lake Cree Nation created the Achimewin Opisu Society and was charged with investigating unmarked graves for hundreds of children who never returned from the school. On Tuesday, they revealed the results from their preliminary report. Leah Redcrow is the CEO of the society. She says that tainted, unpasteurized milk resulted in a genocide of the children.
These children died in the hundreds from drinking unpasteurized raw cow's milk. They were transmitted tuberculosis through the unpasteurized raw cow's milk, and they also died of many other fatal milk-borne diseases. This was done recklessly at the hands of the school administrators, who are all now dead, and the Department of Indian Affairs did not impose safety measures for these children.
The cows were on a farm located on the school grounds. The report says the cows were rarely tested, if at all, for disease, and the children got sick very quickly.
The children required a health clearance prior to admission into the school. They were healthy. There was no health concerns with them. Suddenly, a month later, they were infected with tuberculosis and many other fatal milk-borne diseases that led to their premature deaths. How this was happening was the school had a cream separator. All the cream would get loaded into a rail cart and would be shipped off for pasteurization. All the raw skim milk filled with disease was fed to the children.
Nearly 20 years ago, Leah Redcrow says a mass grave was found at this cemetery.
This big tree right behind me is where we found a mass grave that was accidentally excavated in 2004. The mass grave was filled with children-sized skeletons wrapped in white cloth, and we now don't know that the white cloth that they were wrapped in were bed sheets from the residential school.
Eric Large was a school survivor. He is the lead investigator on the report. He talked about finding remains of a child while digging to bury a family member in 2017.
I came across some bones, some small bones, and I guess I was in shock, first of all. And then I kept on, and then a rib cage with both sides attached to a spine. And it was hard to tell, like if you're in shock, you know. But they looked kind of small, and then the people that were around me, the relatives, they just put them on the side there for now. I kept on, and the next item was a skull.
The Society is working with the Catholic Church and is busy translating thousands of old school documents from French to help identify missing children. Excavations and repatriating the children's remains will be done in the future. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, near Saddle Lake, Alberta.
A First Nation in BC also released results from the second phase of its investigation of a former residential school site. Williams Lake First Nation says an additional 66 reflections have been located at the former St. Joseph's Mission Residential School. Officials say the reflections indicate characteristics of potential human remains. Last year, the First Nation announced ground-penetrating radar had located 93 reflections. St. Joseph's Mission is located near Williams Lake and operated from 1886 to 1981. Chief Willie Sellers says thousands of children were forced to attend the school.
For the victims of the St. Joseph's, for the survivors and for their families, we say this: we see you, we have heard your stories, we believe you, and the work we are doing is done for the purpose of bringing the truth to light.
The National Indian Residential School Crisis Line is available for survivors and others who might need support. That number is 1-866-925-4419. It will cost Canada $2.8 billion to settle a class action lawsuit of former students of residential schools. The settlement seeks reparations for language and culture loss for school survivors from 325 First Nations and builds upon the 2021 Godfredson Day Scholars Agreement. APTN's Fraser Needham has more on the settlement, which was first announced last week.
John Phillips was not at Saturday's press conference given by Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller, but he is one of the lawyers who worked on behalf of the plaintiffs, and he says the agreement is unique because it allows First Nations to spend programming dollars in ways they see best.
Canada imposed the residential school policy. It developed curriculum, it imposed a teacher, it provided a school, and it pounded the language and culture and identity out of the Aboriginal children for 70 years. What we're trying to do in some small way is to reverse that by letting the band decide. Take the education example, what teacher, what curriculum, what school, and what program they want the children to be in.
The money will be placed in a not-for-profit trust independent of government. It will be used for programming built on the 4 pillars of revival and protection of Indigenous languages, revival and protection of Indigenous cultures, protection and promotion of heritage, and wellness for Indigenous communities. At Saturday's press conference in Vancouver, Minister Miller said no amount of money can ever make up for what the residential school system took away, but he hopes this is a start.
What it can do is help address the collective harm caused by Canada's past, a deeply colonial one, and the loss of language, the loss of culture, and the loss of heritage.
Also at the press conference, former Kamloops Band Chief Shane Godfredson said residential schools wiped out Indigenous ways of governing, speaking, and doing.
That Canada's policy of attacking our language and culture for over 120 years had devastated our own system of government and laws, and seriously impacted our language. As Chief Sparrow talked about, he doesn't speak the language, and neither do I, unfortunately.
Like Miller, Phillips says no amount of financial compensation can replace what has been lost, but at the same time, the settlement agreement must be seen as significant.
The answer is that it's never enough. There's never going to be enough. But is this what we can achieve practically and really to try to get some level of reconciliation and some fixed communities? Yes. The fact of the matter is the $2.8 billion is a single line item in the federal budget. It's a big deal.
The agreement will now go before the federal court for approval at the end of February. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Meanwhile, survivors of Île-à-la-Crosse residential school in northern Saskatchewan have launched a class action suit against the provincial and federal governments. It comes as the numbers of survivors drop almost daily. The survivors group and supporters turned out in force, though as the court filing was announced for a proposed class action lawsuit, they're seeking compensation for the harms done at the school, where approximately 1,500 children, mainly Métis, attended. The Métis Nation Saskatchewan is backing the group, saying for too long, the truth of residential school experience of Métis survivors has been ignored, and survivors denied benefits from other settlements.
The Île-à-Crosse residential school is one of the oldest schools in Canada. So when you think about that and you put it into context, over 100 years and 6 to 7 generations of harm in that school. And it didn't just affect Île-à-Crosse. It affected all of the surrounding communities in northwest Saskatchewan. The
survivors group hopes the action spurs both levels of government to come to the table to work out a compensation package. Failing that, it says the case will go to court. The MNS says its support includes financial backing for a lawsuit, but didn't give a dollar figure. Meanwhile, the Saskatchewan government said in an emailed statement it couldn't comment as the matter is before the courts. A father from a First Nation in northern Manitoba has been in Winnipeg searching for his missing daughter. That story and more coming up after the break. Welcome back. A father from St. Teresa Point First Nation in northern Manitoba is heading home from Winnipeg with no news on his missing daughter. Albert Shingu says it's very hard to go home without knowing where his daughter Ashley is. APTN's Leanne Sanders has that story.
My girl, my baby girl, I miss you. I need you home.
Albert Shingus says searching for his 31-year-old daughter, missing since last year, has been emotional for him. Shingus has searched for Ashley whenever he could make the long trip from his northeastern Manitoba reserve. This time, he had help from volunteers with the Bear Clan Patrol, but still no sign of his daughter.
It was very sensitive for me to do the walk with the Bear Clan, but it was a bit easy that I know the Bear Clan had been there for me and for everyone that needed that help.
Albert and his wife care for several grandchildren at St. Teresa Point, including 2 of Ashley's 3 children. He says searching is exhausting.
It was tough for the past 2 weeks since I've been here in Winnipeg, looking every night. Sometimes I stay out till 2 o'clock in the morning, come home tired.
Ashley was last seen in the area of Henry Avenue and Main Street, March 11th, 2022. Search team members from St. Teresa Point and Bear Clan Patrol members say while there have been sightings reported to them in recent days, none have been confirmed. The family is also still awaiting word from police on DNA testing being done to determine the identity of Buffalo Woman, the 4th unidentified victim of a Winnipeg serial killer.
Myself, my wife, and my oldest daughter had provided a DNA, and they said 30 to 60 days for that thing to come back. I don't want to think in a bad way. I want to think in a good way, like she's around. I want to think that she's here. She's around.
Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
It's a powerful image, and the family of one of the Indigenous women alleged to have been killed by a Winnipeg serial killer hopes it will draw international attention. Here's Leanne Sanders again with that story.
Indigenous women in Canada they're not safe, and people seem to think that we're disposable, that we're trash, that we're not human beings. And sometimes you need to go to extreme measures and make extreme pieces of art just to be able to catch people's attention.
Cambria Harris is the daughter of Morgan Harris. She's been in the spotlight since her mother, Morgan, was identified as one of the alleged victims of 35-year-old Jeremy Skibicki last year. Now Harris is using her graphic design skills to raise money. For her, the artwork evoked many different emotions. The image is now featured on T-shirts being sold as a fundraiser for Camp Morgan at Winnipeg's Brady Road landfill, where one victim was found last June.
It says, in memory of MMIWG2S, and right above that you can see a face and a few hands trying to break out of the ground, which is meant to symbolize being stuck in the Brady landfill and all missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. It's the idea of being stuck underneath the ground and never being found and no one ever looking for them.
It caught the attention of Marie Babisky, also known as Pretty East Van. an Indigenous designer and screen printer who saw Harris's artwork on social media and offered to make the shirts to help out.
I grew up in a very hard street life, and I've survived things that I probably shouldn't have. So I could relate very strongly with these women who are believed to be in the landfill. And I feel like they don't have a voice, and it's heartbreaking to me.
50 shirts have sold so far, and that number is climbing. Orders have come from as far away as Germany, and a Swedish media outlet is interviewing Harris this week. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The Arctic Winter Games kick off on Sunday. We've got a look ahead at the first games in 4 years after the break. Welcome back. Inflation has been hitting Canadians hard at the cash register. In Nunavut, prices for groceries were already sky high before this latest round of increases. Our Kent Driscoll dropped by to visit the people who help keep Iqaluit's most vulnerable fed.
The Kajuktavik Food Center in Iqaluit serves anywhere between 350 and 500 meals a day in a city of just 8,000 people. Those numbers move based on how much money Iqaluit's lower income residents have on hand.
The trend really depends on the income assistance that is available to community members. So during the pandemic, we saw numbers drop quite significantly when CERB became available. And then last October, when CRB came to an end, we saw our numbers start to increase. And then when inflation started to rise in January, ever since we've seen numbers increase substantially month after month.
Inflation means people don't have enough money for food. It also means that it costs the food center more to feed people.
Cost of food has increased for us this year by about 50%. Shipping rates have increased by about 45%. To keep up with such a huge increase in demand, we've had to hire multiple more people, so our labor costs have also increased quite substantially. And at a time where, we see this in the nonprofit world, that typically when there is economic stress, it affects the amount of donations that are going into the charity sector.
High demand and increasing costs are a tough combo for any nonprofit. Kajuktavik is stretching to meet demand because that's what they're used to.
That's the thing with nonprofits, is that our financial situation really changes very significantly from year to year. It depends on contribution agreements. It depends on, we could develop a great partnership with a foundation, but they're only interested in funding us for 1 year.
It isn't only a Nunavut problem. Increased social stresses have seen food banks in trouble all across the country.
Ultimately, what we've come to see in the last year is we're seeing food banks around the country close or not being able to distribute food for months and months because they've run out of funding, is that Canada's response to food insecurity has been to rely on the charity sector, and that is unsustainable.
They're going to try and sustain the unsustainable here at Kajuktavik. Given their successful track record, odds are they pull it off. Because if they can't, that's 350 to 500 meals a day that Iqaluit residents won't be able to eat. And that's unsustainable too. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
The 2023 Arctic Winter Games begin this weekend, and Team Nunavut is ready for the parade of teams with their brand new uniforms. Team Nunavut members were at the Legislative Assembly for a bit of a fashion show, showing exactly what you can expect to see from Team Nunavut. Nice toques, and that is Nunavut colors, and the always sought after Nunavut pin set. If you collect all the parts, it shows Inuit making an igloo. As Nunavut's Minister of Community and Government Services notes, this team has waited a long time due to the last games being cancelled by COVID.
And this is an especially significant mark today, since it's the first Arctic Winter Games since 2018, when the South Slave region in the NWT hosted.
And with the 2023 Arctic Winter Games set to take place in Treaty 8 this weekend, there's just hours left of practice to go. Our reporter Sarah Connors caught up with some Arctic sports athletes from the Yukon to see how they're feeling about the upcoming games.
Cullen Sayas and his team are practicing the 1-foot and 2-foot high kick. A traditional game originally played by the Inuit, it requires athletes to use explosive force while keeping their balance. At 13, Sayas is the youngest athlete from the Yukon to compete in Arctic sports at the upcoming Arctic Winter Games.
For my age, I think I'm really good, and that competing against older people is kind of scary, but this one's just gonna be fun. And
Sayas is a member of the Kawanni First Nation. He's one of a few First Nations athletes from the Yukon that will compete in Arctic sports at this year's Games. One of the others is his older brother, 16-year-old Hudson. The Games will be their first major sporting event outside of the Yukon.
Honestly, couldn't ask for more. You know, I love the kid. We've done everything together, so it's kind of just amazing, both of us going to our first major event together.
The Arctic Winter Games is a high-profile circumpolar sport competition for northern and Arctic athletes. Held every 2 years, it includes sports like alpine skiing, curling, and hockey. This year's Games will be the first since 2018 after they were canceled in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Coach Eric Porter will also be competing this year. He says unlike a lot of mainstream sports, the Arctic Winter Games encourages social and cultural exchanges.
You're going to see a lot of dances and performances like that, cultural stuff, and honestly just a whole week long of good festivities.
The 2023 Arctic Winter Games will run from January 29th to February 4th in Wood Buffalo, Alberta. The Sayas brothers say they can't wait to compete with other northern athletes.
I think it's just that there's so many different sports happening in one specific place that it's just such a good vibe, and you're just super excited and feel like you can do good, hopefully.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
And a good luck to all the athletes participating at the Arctic Winter Games in the days ahead. We have 2 reporters in Treaty 8 to cover the games, and looking forward to seeing the stories coming out of there. That's going to do it for us this weekend. For news anytime, you can visit our website. That's aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.